My name is Mustafa El-Shahed. I'm an associate professor at Oklahoma State University. I'm just the moderator here, but I'm very proud to have a list of 3 really distinguished speakers who had a very long career and had so many accomplishments in business, research, public service, policy making, many different facets of life. 3 very successful and interesting individuals. So without eating a lot of time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first speaker, Margaret Arson. She is the chair of the Crop Diversity Trust in Canada. She works at the board level in support of improvements in water research management. She's interested in how to balance agricultural productivity and rural development. She was the member of the UN Secretary General Advisory on Water, the IFDC Fertilizer Council. She sits on the Syngenta Foundation boards. She's the founding chair of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Water. She's a member of many different forums and networks. She is the past deputy ED of the UNICEF. She's the president of the, or former president of the Population Council in New York. She was the deputy minister in the Department of Health and Welfare, I assume in Canada, and she has 11 honorary degrees, and she's an officer of the Order of Canada. So, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The Crop Trust isn't in Canada. I'm in Canada, but the things I do are global, so that's okay, just so long as just accuracy here. Good afternoon. Thank you for congratulations on being here and finding this room and getting here, and I'm glad you're here. So please breathe loudly so that we'll know that we have an audience with us. Okay. As you can see, and from the introduction, you can see that I'm not, we were talking yesterday about an onomics, because we've got ergonomics, we've got genomics, all the rest of it. I'm not even an ologist. I'm not a hydrologist, an agronomist, an economist, a geologist, etc. I am not one of those that make up the field largely of water. What I am is a policy person. And what I've done for the last 2 decades is to listen hard and work at the board level with people that are the scientists and are the experts on water management. And in order to try and form views about what the policy impacts have to be, because the last couple of sessions have been, they were very interesting, very informative. They talked about research and research vis-a-vis problems, but none of them talked about how you actually get that research implemented and how you move things into the domain of actual use. So I want to talk about some of the same things the last couple of sessions have talked about, but try and add a little more of what it will take from the policy angle to actually make that happen. So sustainability solutions in science will only come if people and governments and people that motivate governments actually take seriously the issues that are under discussion. So, the biggest threats from the world of water, we've heard about them already today. How many people here have been in this room for earlier sessions? Not everybody? Okay, yes? Okay, about half, all right. We'll talk a little bit about the biggest threats in the world of water then, and talk about some of the problem areas that can become solutions. And then I want to be obedient to the theme of the conference, which is the new scientific frontiers that are involved, the science in hand, and what new scientists have to do, very much including you. I presume that the reason that you're here is that you have an interest in some of the sciences or some of the policy issue areas that have to do with water, and I think this is the most exciting field in the world, so I hope when you leave here you're even more determined to do something in that area. I always start off at the very basics with water because I think it's so important to do it. We have the same amount of water on the planet that the dinosaurs had. I think it's really important to keep realizing that. The amount of water does not change on the planet. And when you have a glass of water, and by the way, I forgot mine. I use that one. When you have a glass of water, you're having water that has been through 6 dinosaurs, 5 industrial plants, 4,500 people, 8 glaciers, etc. So water is a continually cycling substance. But we've got the same amount of water that we've always had on the planet. What's happened is that the use patterns and the settlement patterns of that water have changed. So here you have a map, 2 maps, that are only 30 years apart. And the red shows increasing use and even overuse of water. So you've had a situation where we've moved from an already uncomfortable situation, those that are in red areas in the upper left-hand side, and the very larger prevalence of red and orange areas in the lower right-hand side. So this is, and it's very interesting who produced this map. This has been produced by U.S. information or U.S. intelligence sources. They're starting to study water, not because they want to come and steal water, because they're very concerned about the political instability that will result from countries that don't have the internal stability to work because of absence of water. And there's going to be, predictable civil unrest, as there is already in some countries. So this is an important map, but what I want you to remember is we've got the same amount of water. So when somebody says to you, isn't it awful, the world has less water? The world doesn't have less water. Some places do. And the last couple of sessions we're talking about some of the reasons for this. Generally over-abstraction, pulling more out of rivers. The Nile at one point actually flowed into the Mediterranean. Now if you fly down over the delta and the desert, it doesn't. There's 70 rivers in the world that no longer reach the ocean as they once did. And so therefore, we're changing the pattern of water around the world. So first big fact, same amount of water. Second big fact, the way we use it. Somewhere I'm sure I have a pointer, but I don't see it. So I'll try and do it this way. If you see the blue, the first blue drop on the left-hand side, that's all the water in the world. And of course, only that small amount of blue coming out of the middle is the fresh water, 2.5%. The rest of it is salt water. Out of that 2.5%, did you find it? Thank you so much. Goodness, what do I do? Just push this end? Okay, yeah, okay. Out of that 2.5%, most of this is wound up in glaciers, and the rest is in groundwater. So those are our 2 biggest sources of fresh water. And then if you take what's in the surface and atmosphere, you've got lakes, soil moisture, atmosphere. All the rivers of the world are only 1.5% of that water. So the biggest one is the groundwater use, or the groundwater capability. How do we use it, which is the part over here? Well, I think everybody in this room would know that the biggest use is agriculture. Globally, 68%. We've been talking in the last session about Egypt running at about 85%, which is not abnormal for countries like Egypt. So freshwater use is very largely for agriculture, ergo you can't solve water availability or water stringency without really looking at agriculture, agricultural use, and the potential policies and practices that might change the way we look at agriculture. World water demand is projected to grow by 55% by 2050. The blue there, as you would expect, is irrigation. The red on top is power and electricity, because you've seen how people's demands for power is very, very strong. People's need for water is absolute. We can't live very long without it. But those 2 contenders, along with the food, are what's going to shape the 21st century. So water demand is projected to grow by 55% by 2050. This is an IFPRI slide by the look of it. How much more water for cereals? This is an FAO slide. Look at the purple part there. The purple part is the amount that we're spending, the amount of water that we're using, not to grow cereals to eat, but for food and fodder. Why is that? With increased prosperity, we eat more. Anybody awake? What do we eat more of if we're... Yeah. I said, what do people that have more money eat more of? Protein foods. Yeah, meat, beef, exactly, chicken, etc. So as we get more wealthy, as societies around the world have more money, they spend more money on protein-based foods. And if you were in the last sessions, you will have seen how much bigger the water footprint is for protein-based foods than it is for plant-based foods. So out of the huge increase in what we need for water and out of the large amount that we use for water, even the characteristics are changing and more is going into food and fodder. To make 1 calorie of food, it takes about a liter of water. So as our calorie consumption grows up, so does the water that we need to produce it. If you turn it into biofuels, you still have about the same relationship. And so therefore, to produce a cup of a biofuel, ethanol, something like that, has enough calories that has the equivalent amount of calories for a lot more water. Water and MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, same water as it's always had, if not a little less, and even more people. The per person count is what counts. We talked about this in the last sessions. Middle East and North Africa population doubled from 70 to 2001. So therefore, if there was 3,500 cubic meters per person then, there's now going down towards 600 cubic meters per person. And that's getting to be dangerous. You can't do what you need to do. The Arabian Peninsula consumes more water than renewable supply. Egypt, Sudan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Syria are close behind. Jordanians, of course, are the poster child with the least amount per year. So this is a region that has real issues, and that's one of the reasons why you're leaders, whether you realize it or not, in things like water reuse, and you have some of the best water engineers in the world and some of the best people looking at issues such as how you do reuse water. So Egypt's water crisis and the recipe for disaster. I found this on the web, somebody named Amir Dakar, and I thought this is as good a list, as good simple list as any that I've seen. He says, look, Egypt has severe water scarcity. The Nile is the lifeline for agriculture, for drinking, industrial, etc. But there's a tough future. Egypt's population is mushrooming, 41% since the 1990s, 5,000 newborns a week. 5,000. So that means more houses, more needs, more agriculture, etc. as those grow up, have kids, etc. And the population will grow from its current total of 80 million to 97 million by the year 2025. So that's a big population growth. You're now in an annual water deficit, and the United Nations is making warning signs about Egypt and its future in water. So what are the elements of the Egypt water problem? We talked about new ideas in the last couple of sessions. What are the elements of the issues that people could really get to work on, you as current and future scientists? Well, if you look at the two there, severe water scarcity, but let's look at the tough future and population, inefficient and irrigation and pollution, etc. So let's just go through these. Inefficient population or inefficient irrigation, 6% of arable and agricultural lands, excessive watering, wasteful irrigation techniques, etc. This is a really good area for somebody going into agricultural science because every drop that you save and use properly, it covers a lot of good things. It may help with agricultural runoff, it'll help with the economy of using the water, and it makes the water go as far as it was intended to go. The irrigation network draws almost entirely from the Aswan High Dam. We know that. Pollution, agricultural runoff, industrial effluents, municipal sewage is untreated due to lack of water treatment plants and ones that don't work. Pollutants from pesticides and herbicides. If you're interested in the physics of water or interested in the dynamics of water, you've got a great future in your own country addressing these issues and these problems. The future of the Nile. Egypt has a very high percentage share of the Nile, but we've been talking in the last couple of sessions about the potential created by the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, but it won't be the last one. Populations are mushrooming up the Nile as well as in Egypt, and so therefore there's going to be a demand for that water. People need to eat, they need to drink water, and so that demand is absolutely going to grow. And alarming proportion. So here's his 6 Egyptian water dilemmas: population, mitigating water scarcity, implementing water conservation techniques, more efficient irrigation, control water pollution, and come to an understanding with the neighboring countries. And I think good, sensible things have been said about that already, so I won't go into that one. Population. I'm fascinated the way this is simply discussed as if it were a given, whereas there are really good things that ought to be done anyway that have an enormous effect on population. The primary one is having little girls go to school. And more young girls should be going to school and staying longer in Egypt than is the case now. So therefore, if you're going into education, if you're working on keeping girls in school, you're actually making a contribution to the population issue and therefore to the water issue. Studying demography is another issue area. How many couples are there that are having more children than they actually want to have because of the absence of contraceptive technology or the easy availability of it? Meeting the unmet need for contraception is one of the easiest and least controversial ways of doing this. But the biggest one of all is the age of marriage. And this is one that various times have been taken on in Egypt. Let me just give you something to make you think about it. If a 16-year-old has a child who at 16 has another child, who at 16 has another child, who at 16 has another child, in 100 years, how many people do you have that have been in that chain? Many. Okay, that's a good answer. About 98. If a 33-year-old has a child who at 33 has a child, who at 33 has a child, in 100 years, how many do you have there? Yes, much less. In fact, 6 vis-a-vis 90. So it really becomes... So the age of marriage, which is good for girls in Egypt, it's good for a whole bunch of things. You don't have to wait till 33. I'm just using that because the mathematics of it to explain very simply. But just delaying the age of marriage for young girls in Egypt would make a tremendous difference to the demographic profile ahead and would make a difference to demand for all sorts of things, very much including water. So what new scientists should be doing? Think about a career in demography, in reproductive health. Think about rural sociology. I mean, these are the things which are really determinant about water demand, and it's really serious. Water stress changes, these are the water stress changes. 80% of future stress from population and development, not from climate change. Of course, climate change is vital and important, but we're doing more impact through population change and population growth than climate change is going to do. And we ignore that fact and we don't talk about it. Okay, second thing, water conservation, new scientific frontiers in water conservation. We've got lots of science in hand. We've heard about membranes, nanoengineering, industrial retooling, etc. The science we need, engineering to save water, but really we need social science on motivation. We need an economic understanding of incentives. I was sitting there in the last session with people talking about energy use and never mentioning the subsidy that exists on oil and gas in this country. How can you get to new forms of energy use if you're subsidizing the one that is there now? What will be the incentive for any company to actually move in and take on new forms of energy use? So the science that we need very much includes economic analysis of motivation, social science analysis, etc. If you're in those fields, you are really needed to try and get at some of the difficult problems that exist in the water conservation area. Mitigating water scarcity. There's lots of new scientific frontiers, water purification techniques, better crop per drop measuring, extension services, choice of crop, choice of farming methods, when seeds are planted, etc. The science we need is partly there. We need more of it. If you're a crop scientist, that is going to be what you're going to be concentrating on, is trying to get more water use efficiency or more crop per drop. But don't forget, it's the social science. It's whether people actually adopt and make these changes that is going to make the huge difference. Taking gray water in town more seriously. There's several places in the world that are taking gray water, which is the water that comes, not the black water or the yellow water, which have feces or urine in them, but taking gray water, which comes from bathing, from other sources, from dishwashers, if you're lucky enough to have a dishwasher, taking these sources and cleaning them enough for their next use, but using that again. The last panel was talking about the fact that Egypt uses most drops of water at least twice. We can improve on that number. Israel says they use it 7 times. They're probably inflating that slightly. But the point is somewhere between 2 and 7. If we got water and used it and recycled it and used it, that would provide a lot more water than potential new sources, such as desalination, that have a huge impact on greenhouse gases. In New York City, very large buildings have basement wastewater treatment plants using membrane bioreactor disinfection, and where the recovered water is used as flush water throughout the building and for irrigation. So it doesn't have to be a country from the south where these recommendations are made. There's buildings all around the world that are now using the green building concept to go right into the reuse of water. So that's another way of extending the water availability that we have, and what we do with the water in urban areas. Water reuse is less energy intensive than desal quite a bit. If you look at the first level there, that's the energy required for desal. Even though it has been going down, it has in the last 15 years, it takes much less energy than it used to. Seawater desalination from reverse osmosis, but wastewater reclamation is the third one down. And so therefore, that is a better use of energy to get the water that you need than going really just on the energy point. And the nexus of energy, water, and food we talked about in one of the earlier sessions. So if you're interested in any of those sciences, there's tremendous contributions that have to be made. More efficient irrigation techniques, talked a little bit about those already. The science in hand now is drip irrigation, fertigation, soil leveling, all sorts of good things that regional organizations like ICARDA have worked on. The science we need includes all of those, more new seeds, encapsulated seeds, things like putting fertilizer into the ground so that it's not having the runoff that creates the problems when we reuse water, using less fertilizer, putting it further into the ground. It's called deep fertilizer placement. Coating seeds with the fertilizer that's needed, using more organics, all sorts of things. If that's the area that you're interested in, that will stretch the water availability. This chap isn't Egyptian, obviously. He comes from quite a bit further east, but this is the poster boy of why what countries have water problems. He's standing ankle deep in flood irrigation of a crop that shouldn't be flood irrigated, and he's going to make an awful lot of political problem if anybody tries to come and take any of it away. So therefore, when you talk about a number of countries, you talk about why you can't make changes. Policies become very difficult because people get used to farming in a certain way. No Egyptian farmer imagines looking like that, but I always like showing that picture because I see all these smiles like, oh, imagine having that much water. You could go and stand around in it.
5 minutes.
5? Okay. Controlling water pollution, we can make the problem an opportunity. The threats from bad wastewater management are very real. Damage to the world's ecosystems, increased damage to health. Severely polluted water limits the agricultural use, obviously. It can damage livelihoods and economics. And it's very poor and unpleasant for urban living conditions. So controlling water pollution better than we do globally is a very good idea. Egypt is not bad here, but there's a lot more that we can do. Around the world, somebody showed the pictures pointing out that we'd done not badly in terms of getting drinking water to people, but sanitation, we're really lagging behind. Why? A lot of priority on toilet facilities. Another one is out of sight, out of mind. Things go into the toilet, and then we don't care much where they go after that. Governments try and follow what people worry about, and so therefore governments often don't care that much either. So you have the phenomena of increases in personal sanitation leading to a more difficult situation for wastewater because there simply isn't the sewerage that is needed. So I hope some of you might be interested in that field. There's all sorts of exciting things that are going on in this whole area, particularly wastewater reuse, but that is one of the frontiers that we have to get on, because 2 million tons of waste, estimated to equal 2 or more billion tons of wastewater, are discharged daily into the rivers or seas. We're going to lose them unless we take better care of them. You've got science in this country that can be used for that, so there is part of a future there. So why wastewater? Why wastewater? Because wastewater is mostly made up of water. And so therefore, if we stop putting the waste into it or get better at pulling it out of it, we'll have more water as well. So wastewater is a combination of domestic effluent, black water, gray water, water from commercial establishments and institutions, including hospitals, industrial effluent, stormwater, other urban runoff, and we were talking about water in the wadis. We've got to get better at using that water. The science frontiers are very much there. There's lots of good economic benefits from improved wastewater management. Somebody talked about taking water to Sinai and then having to treat it. If you treat wastewater better, then the treatment costs of the next stage are obviously a great deal less. Improved living conditions, property, land values, etc. Talked earlier about the fact that energy is a great big water user. You can also extract energy from water. We know about hydro, but if you extract energy from wastewater, from the temperature differential that exists in wastewater, you've got another energy source. You can harvest energy benefits. They can be linked to the treatment of local biodegradable wastes, food wastes. Lots of countries now, Japan, others, are saying all wastewater treatment plants have to be internally energy self-generating. In other words, we won't allow electricity from the grid anymore to go into wastewater treatment plants. You've got to use the energy which is inherent in wastewater to do that. You should be doing that here, absolutely. Better quality effluents from intensive energy processes, yes. Japan has a goal of 100% energy independence for wastewater treatment plants. It's potentially a big idea. In the UK, one of the plants currently imports qualities of biodegradable waste for co-digestion. It got to self-sufficiency using the waste in wastewater, and it started to import waste to put even more into them to do the biodigestion. It's selling electricity to the grid. We have to look at these things differently. When you look at the water energy nexus, those are the places where it's really exciting. I'm going to get called very, very soon. So 3 to 4% of national energy production is used for waste and wastewater services in developed, in the medium and upper level countries. We got to get those numbers down. It's also potentially small energy that's important. There's more than 20 million small-scale urban biogas digesters in China. 20 million, think about that. There's more than 2 million in India, and according to a 2006 report, there's 8 in Egypt. That does seem like maybe an opportunity is being missed. Again, I cycle back to the subsidies that exist on oil and gas. How are you going to get a good technology like biodigestion, which produces its own energy source, which removes greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, which solves a number of issues all at once? How are you going to get that to happen without the incentives and the policies that could make it happen? There's a vital link with agriculture. You know that agriculture requires nutrients, whether you get these through compost, whether you get these through organic forms, or whether you use chemical fertilizers. Why aren't we using more of the nutrients that comes through in our own digestive processes? WHO and others have done a lot of work on the conditions which make this wastewater reuse safe. They've answered it in all sorts of books and things. So if that's your field, or rural agriculture, or rural nutrients, we've got answers that we never had before, and that expands both water use and the others. So perhaps in the future, maybe we won't think about wastewater treatment plants, but waste recovery, energy production facilities that recover and produce water for reuse, energy for internal use, or for export, etc. Regulatory frameworks are absolutely key. Egypt's got enough good laws on the books to do all the things you want to do. You have a tougher time in actually making them happen. Maybe you could do some work in political science or in regulatory reform to see what incentives would be needed to make your own regulations already work. We know the framework of actions and indicators: reduce pollution, remedy impact, reuse, and recover. The framework is there. The issues are there. The science is there. Egypt certainly got the people to make it happen. There are new frontiers in science, but many of them are within the shape of the conventional issues that we're already dealing with and managing. So good luck. I hope you do it, and I'm there with you. Bye.
Thank you very much. We actually have time for one or two very quick questions. Any questions?
Thanks a lot. It's a very small question. It's about capacity of biogas digesters in China, which you had mentioned that they are more than 20 million. Thanks a lot.
What is the question?
Capacity of each biogas digester, which you have mentioned in China, there are a lot of...
I think they vary. I'm not sufficiently expert to say exactly what, but I think they vary. The more successful biodigesters have proved to be the ones that are closest to one or maybe a family group. There was an initial attempt to try and use biodigesters for communities. You have to have a certain amount of discipline with biodigesters. And things that require a common good often are kind of difficult to do, whereas if you've got a family or a place where mistakes will be traced back to you and punished by the rest of the family, then you've probably got a better outcome in terms of the biodigester. So I'm willing to bet that a number of them are fairly small scale. But do you know anything more about that, about biodigesters?
Most of our biogas uses wasted, at the level of community, as you say.
Yeah.
Even in West Africa, they are doing a lot of experiences. Actually, not only using in terms of renewable winds and solar, but biogas. It could be even more effective at the community level. Then you use your wasted, you use your, anything related, and it produces electricity at the community level.
Shall I ask about information source, please? Information source, in order to search for this?
Just go on the web, go to biogas. Borda, B-O-R-D-A, is probably the best big science-based NGO that has done most of these in Asia. So BORDA will give you a good starting place, and the web will tell you which other organizations and institutions are doing this. But there's all sorts of pictures of big ones, small ones. You can build these in your backyard, and they're a fabulous energy source, and they make electricity. They clean things up. They clean up the bio wastes. So it's a good thing. I'm glad you're interested.
Okay, well, thanks again. Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Mohammed Al-Hamamsi. He's the Desert Tech representative in Egypt, and he had a really long and distinguished career in many areas, business and many other areas. He graduated with a degree in electrical engineering from Cairo University. He has 2 masters, one in MBA in business administration and one in Islamic art and architecture. He had a long career with the IBM company where he worked in Egypt, Europe, Africa, and in the Middle East. He's a founder of Megacom, which is a company specializing in management and business consulting. He is the former chief executive of Vodafone Egypt. He's the former vice chairman of Vodafone Egypt. And currently he serves on the board of many, many different organizations as well as foundations. So.
مساء الخير. Good afternoon. The official language being English, I'll proceed in English, and in some instances I'll introduce some Arab words كده يبقى حاجة فرانكو-عرب شوية. A couple of words of Desert Tech. Desert Tech Foundation is a non-profit organization that has been set up a few years back, 6-7 years back, in Germany, and it's an offshoot of the Club of Rome. It's a center for studies for sustainable development for countries. Basically, it looks at projections of population increase and the development needs, and therefore, what do they need in order to achieve this development in terms of energy, in terms of water, and in terms of sustainability of producing these things. The desert tech concept is based on a number of 3 pillars, actually. One is that the desert receives an energy which is inexhaustible. In 6 hours, the deserts of the world receive the energy that we use in 1 year. In 6 hours, the energy that we use in 1 year. And therefore, it's something that we need to think about as one source of energy. Because, again, the second point of the second pillar of the Desert Tech Foundation studies is that every country should use the energy mix that is available for it. So in some cases, the biomass, in some cases, geothermal energy, water energy, tide energy, wind energy, solar energy. The whole mix of renewable energies must be used, not just one type of energy. You should use all the paraphernalia that you have. And the third point, which is very important, is that civil society must participate in this exercise, because many of these things are behavioral. Like we heard in the previous presentation, we have laws, we have structures in place, but really it is behavioral. We should behave differently to save the water, to save energy, to use it differently, etc., etc. So community involvement, civil society participation is very important for the success of the desert tech concept. I'll show you some figures. Some of the figures I'm showing you will be driven from a study that was conducted by the German Aerospace Authority, the DLR, and it has looked in certain, especially in the MENA. MENA is the Middle East and North Africa region, and the Southern European Union region, to look at the projections of the need of development, population growth, power, and water, energy and water. Now, one important thing that we need to remember is that one of the major challenges that the world faces today is population increase. Now, it varies from place to place. Some countries don't have a population increase. On the contrary, they're trying to encourage their population to increase. But if you look at this one here, in the past century, we increased from 2 billion to about 8 billion we are today, and by the year 2050, we'll probably be between 9 and 10 billion people. Yani it's a significant increase. You need to remember that our country, in Egypt, do you know what is our rate of increase? Do you know how often do we double our population? You know in how many years? عارفين في كم سنة احنا بنتضاعف؟ 30 سنة. يعني انتوا حضراتكم لما يكون عندكم 40 سنة ولا 50 سنة احنا هنكون 160 مليون او 165 مليون او 150 مليون. يعني احنا لازم نفكر جديا في المستقبل بتاعنا، مش بس نبص تحت رجلينا. Our country increases, we double every 30 years, and this, in my personal opinion, is the major challenge that we have, because everything else flows from it. The quality of education, the health services, the level of the standard of living, the employment of the young people, the houses that you live in, poverty, العشوائيات, all these things derive from this traffic. Yeah? The world is seeing some changes. The climate change, انتوا شايفين this is the ice cap in the North Pole, how it has decreased from 79 to 2007. The tundra in Siberia is melting, and when it melts, it releases methane. Methane augments the heat of the Earth, and another challenge as well is the additional turbulences like hurricanes, flooding, tremendous amounts of water falling in places where a lot of water exists already. Whereas in some places where there's no water, where there's very little water, people will still have problems being able to find water to drink. Yani the dry areas are becoming a bit drier in some places, and the other places, the wet areas are becoming even wetter. We add to the challenges, our own contribution is to create catastrophes, human generated catastrophes, like, for example, the Chernobyl accident that happened in 1987, yani 27 years ago, when the Chernobyl reactor exploded, or when there was this accident in Fukushima in Japan, where again we had a serious problem of leakage of nuclear matter in the sea and in the area around it. And as I mentioned, water is going to be a problem in some areas. Yani you have a lot more water in some places, in some other places, water is missing. So the challenges, you probably have seen this earlier, we've seen a number of charts like this, but food security, drinking water, energy, war for resources. Yani resources like water may generate a war. You probably have attended, Taman, all of you, the discussions that were around the dam in Ethiopia and some crazy ideas of going to war, etc. But these things can develop in an unintelligent way into things like this. The question is, the population increasing to become around 10 billion people, the development needs of the population, it's not just that the population is increasing, the standards of living of people must increase. In China it is increasing dramatically, in India it is increasing dramatically, in our country we have increased it, but we need to increase it a lot more. We need to integrate all people in the development of our country. This requires resources, and the resources required are really three times as much as the resources that are available today. And I'm talking about energy resources and water resources in particular. How are we going to have 3 planets in the future? We are thinking of a solution. We're talking about Egypt in particular as a microcosm, and then at the end I'll show you a couple of charts to try and extend this view on the world. If we think of our country, we are around 85 million people today. According to this study done by the DLR, will be about 120 plus million people in 2050. In my personal opinion, will be around 150 to 170 million people. Yeah, we're going to double. The water requirements, we be requiring 120 billion meters, cubic meters per year for our population. Today it's 60 million that we have available. Now, we don't need additional water in this sense, because as we heard previously, we need to use our water more intelligently and to recycle whatever we are producing. However, we will need a tremendous amount of additional water. You know how much the Nile, our share of the Nile, according to the agreements, is every year? You know how much? Fahim? 55, مظبوط. 55 billion. We need an additional apport of another Nile. And this assumes 120 million people, not 150 million people. But it's a serious situation that we need to think about very seriously. طبعا we need to grow food without exhausting the lands that we have, and we need to get out of the land so that we can use the land for agriculture and go and live in the desert. And we live on 6% of Egypt. We have 94% where we can live and keep the agricultural land as it is. Installed electricity is 30 gigawatt. We have those current cuts. It's not the 30 that are being used now, because some plants are being refurbished and we have some problems of supply of fuel, but our needs are going to go to 110 and maybe more gigawatts, multiply by almost 4 by 2050. How do we do that? We are suggesting that we need to move the settlements outside the Nile Valley, and we heard yesterday Dr. Farouk El-Baz talk about this thing. We need to use renewable energy for electricity and for the desalination of water. تحلية المية. Okay, and we need to improve, obviously, the health, education, etc., because we need to bring up the standard of living of all the population and not keep the people who are below poverty lines. We're 26% now below the poverty line. We were 21% when the revolution started. So we really have serious work in front of us. Now, the Constitution, our new Constitution, says that we have to have sustainability in the areas of energy. So what are the resources that we have in terms of resources and driven by energy as well? So for the water first, we will need to do all the good things about recycling, saving, etc., but we will need to produce additional water as well from desalination. This requires energy. What are the sources of energy for Egypt to produce the 110 gigawatts? We have the hydropower, the Nile Dam, Sadd Aswan, Sadd Al-Ali. This produces 2.8 gigawatts, and it is already producing them. We have the wind energy. The potential is about 22 gigawatt. It's in limited places, and for the people who have studied electricity, it is fluctuating depending on the wind, depending on the days, depending on the situation of the on the hours, even because the wind fluctuates. The solar photovoltaic, those the big cells that you see sometimes put on the top of buildings, which can generate electricity from the light. They transform light into electricity. The potential is about 14 gigawatt. All this together, we need to add to find out how we get to 110. The biggest source that we can get is the concentrating solar power. Concentrating solar powers can produce up to 8,500 gigawatts for Egypt because we have so much desert, so much sun. We don't need the 8,500. We're talking about 110. Now, the question will probably be raised, and it's a valid question, why don't we go and do it? And there are a couple of reasons. And one important reason is that the initial cost is high. Initially, buying the equipment, putting it in place is expensive, is more expensive, and I'll explain why. But the running costs are lower because you don't need to add fuel every day. It's just you set up this thing, you clean it, you maintain it, etc., and it runs because the source of fuel is coming from the sun. Now, I'll just say very quickly how the concentrating solar power thermal works. The sun comes down and it heats the water, it heats water. And this water becomes vapor, and the vapor then drives the turbines like a normal steam power station. However, the heat and the energy that transforms the water into steam is coming from the sun and not from burning oil or gas. And then, so we have this heat, and this heat then comes out of the turbine. It is condensed in condensers. It becomes water again, and it goes into the system again. All right. This is the main difference with the photovoltaic cells that you put on top of buildings. There is no heat generation in the photovoltaic cells, and therefore, with the photovoltaic cells, there's no possibility of doing desalination directly. There's possibility of creating electricity and then desalinating the water. But this one, we have heat. We can use it for desalination. Now, how to reduce the costs? One way is to standardize. And to standardize this, we can go for two sizes. I don't want to get into too many technical details here. But the thing is, when you standardize, then you can establish the models, and then you can manufacture locally, which is very important. We need to create jobs for our people. We cannot import these things. They're not high-tech. They're medium technology. We can produce them. We can manufacture them in the country. And we shouldn't sit back and just say we have to get it from Bilad Barra because it's better than what we're getting from here. And we need to be serious about these things. الحاجة الثانية, in the deserts, when you have these stations, when you have these power generation plants, you don't have a lot of water, and you need to save the water, and therefore there are techniques today to use air-cooled condensers. So you cool the water by air, and you need to clean the mirrors because you're concentrating the sun's rays with mirrors. You need to clean them, but there are ways also of cleaning them, dry cleaning, and not using water for this because we have to save the water. It's extremely important for this. Now, when you have the air cooling, then the temperature of the steam coming out of the condenser is still high. It's about 80 degrees. And therefore, if you want to increase your productivity or efficiency, you heat the water even higher. The steam that goes in to a much higher degree, which is like 550 degrees, because it is the differential between the temperature in and out that tell you how much energy you can produce. So all these technologies exist today, and I can give you one example, which is called one installation in Spain, which is the Gemma Solar in Spain, where they have 18 hours of storage of energy. How do you store electricity? Do you know how to store electricity? You can store it in batteries, but not in large amounts. And then the batteries, after a while, you have to throw them away. When you throw them away, they're toxic and they're bad for nature. For the environment. And therefore, they thought and discovered and are using new methods, which is salts, nitrates. They heat the nitrate, it becomes liquid, and then at night when there is no sun, then the water that goes through this these liquid salts, which are at more than 250 degrees. The water is again heated, produces steam, and then you have electricity generated again. So they have 15 hours of storage, yani they produce during the day 9 hours and then 15 hours at night. The same installation, if it was put in Egypt, would be 18 hours of storage because we have more sun and we have a better environment for this thing. Desert Tech has established criteria for sustainability and quality. These criteria are used to evaluate any planned concentrating solar power plant to say whether it meets the quality criteria and sustainability criteria. Because you remember, that it's not just a matter of producing electricity, it's a matter also working on the environment, making sure that you don't pollute, that we don't use a material that is rare. So some of these criteria are, some of these principles, for example, you need clean electricity on demand, you need to ensure social responsibility and economic sustainability, and the third one is the environmental responsibility. So every year, starting this year, Desert Tech is going to look at the different plants and decide which one meets best these criteria and give it an award. These are some of the examples of these plants. The first one, the Andasol, is established in Spain. It has 7.5 hours of storage. It was the first one which was established in Spain. Those big tanks, the red tanks that you see there, are the ones that contain the salt that is going to be molten. Yani the heat goes inside, it melts, and then this stores the energy. The second one, the Shams one, it's in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi has established a town or حي كبير يعني زي 6 أكتوبر عندنا called Masdar. Masdar, they're experimenting in it all sorts of new energy, new renewable energy techniques, and they have the largest generating plant in one unit. It's a parabolic trough, yeah, it's parabolic, heating a tube filled with the oil that then goes to heat the water. Puerto Herrado in Spain is interesting because it uses other technologies. Instead of the parabolic trough, which is expensive to build, يعني المراية عاملة كده مقورة كده اهو. Instead of doing مرايات كده, which is expensive, they do it flat, but they put the flat ones one next to the other كده يبقى شكلهم زي البارابوليك trough. These are called the linear Fresnel mirrors, and this one is interesting because they have air cooling and they have dry cleaning of the mirrors. And the last one is the Gemma Solar. You see this one here? Now here, instead of heating tubes that contain oil, all the heat is going in one spot where it boils the water. And in particular, in the case of Gemma Solar, they're heating actually salt. So the salt is heated and becomes liquid, and then it goes and it exchanges the heat with water that evaporates, and then it goes to turn the turbines. The choice or the decision for the selection of the winner of this year is going to be done probably these days. Egypt. 5 minutes. Okay, I'm almost there. Egypt. Now, for Egypt, this is a map from وزارة الكهرباء, and it shows on it, and we have added on it the number of sites where we can have the concentrated solar power, where you'll have on the seashores, you will be having the ones that have, in addition to generating electricity, they will have water desalination. Inside the deserts or inside the land mass, where they don't have access to water, then we'd have the air-cooled condensers and the dry cleaning of the mirrors. You can see here what the ministry at the time wanted to establish, and they have established a reasonable amount of windmills, of wind farms, generating electricity في الغردقة وفي الزعفرانة. الزعفرانة is en route to غردقة. They were planning also في شرق في east العوينات، شرق العوينات يعملوا برضو الحاجات دي هي، بس I don't think it's happening. يعني بتاعت شرق العوينات دي يمكن مش هيعملوها، اللي هي في الكورنر الجنوبي الغربي بتاع مصر. I don't think it's happening right now. Now, the interesting thing in this chart is this little square. This little square is 55 by 55 kilometers by 55 kilometers. If we wanted to generate all the electricity that we need in 2050 by CSP and concentrating solar power, and we wanted to put it in one place only, this would be the area that it uses. Why? لا لأنه كل محطة بتاخد مساحة. فلو أنت حطيتي محطات جنب بعضيهم في حتة واحدة, this would be يعني it's just to show that the size needed is not so huge compared to the country, because our country, as you all know, is 1,000 kilometers for 1,000 kilometers. ف 55 كيلو في 55 كيلو is not a big thing compared to the total size of the country. And if we were to put everything in one place, this is what it would look like. طيب, this is for Egypt, يعني one approach to solve the problems of energy and water for an increasing population and an increasing standard of standard of living of the population. Now, what about in the world? In the world, this is the map of the world with all the deserts, and in every one of the deserts here, you see the desert's potential. The potential in terms of petawatt hours per year. Now, what is interesting here is that in the year 2008, the total demand of energy in the world was 18 peta-hours. 18 petawatt hours per year. Whilst, for example, the potential is 1,000 here, 125, 200, etc., etc. So energy is abundant in the deserts. Now, the other interesting point is if you look at this square here, the same idea of the area that would suffice to cover the requirements of the world is in this area here, assuming that you put all the stations in the same place. Okay? Now, the next question is, fine, if you build those stations, those electricity generation or energy generation stations in the desert, how will the world population benefit from this? Well, 90% of the world population live within 3,000 kilometers of the desert. 90% within 3,000 kilometers of a desert. Now, transmission lines, there is a loss. When you transmit electricity over lines, there is a loss. When you transmit from Aswan to Alexandria, it's in AC, you lose about 9-10% because of the distance. But there is a new technology where you transmit using DC, direct current, زي بتاع البطاريات يعني, direct current. When you transmit using DC, the loss is about 3% every 1,000 kilometers. And therefore, for 3,000 kilometers, if you lose 10%, it's acceptable. But 90% of the population of the world lives within 3,000 kilometers of any desert. And therefore, in principle, طبعا this is a simplistic view. يعني it is not that simple to put يعني إنما you need to think how you can use this energy, the 6 hours of sun giving you energy for the whole year. You need to think how we can use this thing. It will not be exclusively sun, because you need to use all your capabilities, but it will be to a large extent from the sun. بس ده اللي كنا عاوزين نقوله. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have time for questions. Yes, sir.
Sir, do you think that such projects can be performed only by the government, or it needs a participation from businessmen? And if so, how can we convince them to participate? Thank you.
Boss, we have a big systemic problem يعني في المنظومة بتاعتنا, a big systemic problem which is called الدعم. The subsidies are distorting the economic forces and distorting the economics of doing any project addressing some of these areas and therefore, if you want the private sector to participate, which is the norm, they should participate, but it costs you 10 piasters to produce 1 unit of electricity, and you sell it for 5 piasters. Who in his right mind is going to do this? Okay. The government is calling for what is called PPP, public-private partnership, which is fine. However, it is not attractive at all. And therefore, before we even think of doing it this way, there are ways of doing it, paying subsidies to the company, et cetera, but it will create disputes, and it will create people saying, انتوا بتعملوا مش عارف ايه وفساد وبتاع الكلام ده كله. But the better way of doing it is to remove the subsidies. Now, we cannot remove the subsidies when people are used to this and their salaries, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're spending a certain amount of money every year on subsidies, about 240 billion pounds. احنا ناخد الفلوس دي ندي كل واحد في ايده البليونز باوندز بتاعته، الفلوس بتاعته. And we charge the bread, the bus, the transportation, the train, the مش عارف ايه, the كهرباء at the proper price. In that case, the private sector is interested because he's going to produce at 10, he can sell it at 11, he makes his profit, he's happy. And the government doesn't have to carry the burden of everything. الأتوبيس على القطر على مش عارف ايه عليه. يعني it's so illogical and the problem يعني أنا كمصري بتعب من الحكاية دي. احنا ما عندناش الإرادة السياسية لحل المشكلة من غير ما نظلم حد. لأنه فعلا في ناس غلابة ومش قادروش يعيشوا غير بالكلام ده. ولازم نراعي الحاجات دي. لكن لازم نراعي بطريقة ذكية. أنت عارف إنه في ناس أعرفها ويمكن تعرفها بيشتروا عيش. أنا عندي واحد صديقي بيشتري 400 رغيف من الكشك. الناس واقفين طوابير، هو عنده يعرف الراجل فبيشتري 50 ب50 جنيه بيجيب 400 رغيف والراجل بياخد 10 جنيه عليهم. وبيديله 400 رغيف، قول له 400 رغيف بتعمل بيهم ايه؟ بيقول لي عشان بوكل الكلاب. الصراحه حرام، لكن لو كان الرغيف بجنيه وانا بديله في ايده ال 10 جنيه كل يوم عشان يشتري، عمره ما هيشتري 400 رغيف ب 400 جنيه كلاب، يعني مش معقوله. فاحنا السبسيديز is destroying all the economic aspects of our economy. It is a bad thing. We should remove it, بس take into account that we have poor people, we have to cater for their needs. We have to remember this.
Yes, another question, quickly.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sir, Mohammed Sabri, Faculty of Science. In your opinion, what's the compare between what is the find for Egypt the next time between nuclear energy power plant or solar energy power plant? In the next year, we have a problem in electricity and water next time from Ethiopia, and that nuclear energy will provide us with the electricity and water and another diplomatic.
Okay, was it? It's a very valid question. Should we go nuclear or we go with renewable energies of this sort? طبعا nuclear costs. The cost of nuclear is high, is very high. But the cost of nuclear is hiding another thing. And you build the nuclear station for X, and after 40 or 50 years, you have to decommission it. Decommission it يعني تفكها. Clean it, and then dispose الحاجات دي اللي هي radioactive. So if you build it for $2 billion for 1 gigawatt, you will decommission it in 40 years or 50 years for $8 billion. But the people don't see this at the beginning. بيقول لك في الأول I'll spend 2 billion دلوقتي. لكن your children are going to be spending 8 billion to decommission it. That's one aspect. The other aspect, we have the sun available. يعني why do these unless for political reasons, for military reasons maybe, or political reasons, we need to have a nuclear capability. That's another story. This is a political decision. Like just from the rational energy requirements, in my opinion, solar.
You prefer solar energy?
In my personal rational judgment, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, our next speaker is Mr. Salif Diop. Mr. Diop has been the UNEP's Division of Early Warning and Assessment. He worked a lot there as a senior officer for nearly 15 years. He's a water specialist with extensive experience in various aspects of coastal oceanography, freshwater assessment, sustainable management and development, He has a doctorate from University of Louis Pasteur in Strasbourg, France.
Just go through.
He's a member of various working groups, including numerous scientific and research institutions. He has many different research publications and has authored many different books. He's a member of many different academies in Senegal and in various regional academies in Africa, and member of the World Academy of Sciences for the advancement of science in developing countries. So, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me just take this opportunity first to thank you all and to say how glad I am to be here and to participate to this meeting within Egypt. What I want to do now is, after the science, after the issue related to energy and focusing on Egypt, trying to put it within a context. Of course, Egypt is part of Africa. Let's see within the continents what's the challenge we have in terms of particularly the water resources, because we partly here for water and trying to look at the constraint, the opportunities, particularly for sustainable development. We're talking about the future, our future in particular. Which means what I'm going to do is to organize this talk in then why water is important, just some fundamentals which I can remind people and recall, and then bring what are the challenges we have within the continents and what are the opportunities in terms of options for solutions, and then conclude to the theme of the meeting. It is the future of sustainability. Because we are in this continent, the vision the African Union has is a continent where we'll have equitable and sustainable use and management for poverty alleviation, socio-economic development, regional cooperation, this is important, and the environment. That's the threat. That's what the continent think we should have as a vision for the overall continent. Now, when we talk about water, we're talking about its importance. Of course, particularly with regard to what we were just mentioning, the growing population. It's not only for Egypt, it's for the whole continent. Population is growing, we'll need more water for food, we must secure our water, and we must use it for the energy. We are talking about the nexus between water, food, energy. We are again coming to the same elements, particularly with regard to the water resources. And when we talk about water resources, not only the water quantity, we have also to think on the quality of the water. If we, of course, take again some reminder, water is intervening in any sectors, be it in agriculture, energy, what we were talking about. It's going beyond regarding manufacture, trade, tourism, mining, transport. But don't forget that the water is also important for our ecosystem as a good drinking water, but also on ecosystem services, in particular supplying people in terms of nutrients, and then at the cultural services. We are in an area where water is so important, particularly for the religion, as you know. Because if you don't have water, how are you going to do your religion properly, particularly when you want to pray? In this continent, we have several contradictory situations. Either we have them as a surplus, if you have to the basins of Congo, for example, or what we are talking here in Egypt, scarcity. And then related to that, relation, the development, underdevelopment, overexploitation. And then we have challenges and opportunities. And I think every time that we talked about the challenges, we have to think on the opportunities for action, for solution. And that's what we were going to. What are the key facts? This continent is one of the second driest continent. We have 15% of the global population particularly with regard to if you consider the renewable energy. Water is, of course, unevenly distributed, and you have to consider the climate. And then, the increase in terms of access on improving water and sanitation, which is the problem, because how to keep the path with regard to the drinking and sanitation facilities, considering the population growth, and then the water scarcity. The water scarcity, which is not due only to geography, but also to rapid urbanization, to poor planning, to poverty, and others, which are also other significant factors we have to consider. Let's just illustrate this. The annual water balance. Alexandria, we're here, Nile basins. But then, if you take the red hatches, we should have even include those, wherever you have more than 20% per square kilometers density, which coincide actually in the arid or semi-arid. We should have continued all this exercise here. Again, this is some of the exercise we did, including some Egyptians. We participate to this, and trying to see within the continents the different elements we have in terms of different challenges and opportunities and problems. We would, particularly with regard to water resources. The same here when you consider the area of population density, which are higher than 20 persons per square meter, which again shows clearly the hot spots in some of the areas, main areas of Africa, with regard to runoff and vulnerability. Beside those elements, and that's the comparative advantage, certainly we have to consider, considering the water towers within the continents. Again, take the examples of the Nile basins, where from the southern part, but also from this famous Ethiopian part, where you have those highlands, but you also have those water towers, distributed all along in several basins, several high-level basins, plateaus, and others in Africa. And you, of course, consider, again, another element, which is in terms of renewable water resources, the difference you have between the different sub-regions. Again, that's what we were saying, the unevenly distributed of the water within the continent. Here, the more is green, the more you have, of course, higher renewable water, and the less it is, the more you have a scarcity. The distributions of dams, very quickly, to show you how many dams, particularly in the southern part, in the western part, and in the northern part, in terms of distribution, still low compared to the rest of the world. Because you have, in total, one dam for 700,000 people in Africa, while in the rest of the world, it's one dam for 107. There is still a potential in terms of growing. Of course, looking at the impact as well, and to see how to reduce them if we have to increase the number of dams. And then we come to some indicators, particularly with regard to the population growth. That's why when we're talking about, of course, the increasing of population in these basins, which is the Nile basins and including Egypt, of course, look at the figures here in West Africa. But then what we have also in this part of East Africa, 2.7%, what you have also here in the area of Central Africa. I mean, the population growth is, of course, population is a problem, always. But we should be more concerned, and that's what I was discussing with our colleague, with what are we going to do with these people in terms of skills, in terms of to provide them with the capacity to deal with the problems they're going to face. Mostly, and I think, of course, we're going to have those problems. We're going to face the population increase with regard to the quantity of water we have in the future. But at the same time, we need to see how we're going to arm those people to face those challenges in terms of the quantity of water they have. Let's consider the surface water in general in this continent. 63 international river basins, which cover 64% of the land, and then 90% of the total of the water. In general, most of the rivers we have are transboundaries. That's why, again, when we are talking about the river basins, let's not consider those countries by countries, but let's consider this as shared resources among countries. And let's see how to tackle the resources among those riparian countries. Because that's the necessary condition to see how we will have to manage the resources together, particularly when you're talking about this continent. And that will be one of the challenges we'll talk about. And again, when we talked about surface water, let's not ignore what we have underneath, particularly the transboundary waters. And that was what we were mentioning. In this part of the world, particularly in Egypt, you have also, this Nubian aquifers, which is huge. But you also have them, more or less everywhere in Africa. Again, shared among several countries. And those are resources one country should not and has not to manage alone, but we have to manage it, in cooperation with other countries. Which means, in terms of, if you look at those resources as introduced, and you try to summarize the water challenges we're going to have for the future, we have clustered them into 9 areas, from safe drinking waters to the access to sanitation, to the cooperation, to the how to use water to develop hydropower, of course, to provide food to meet the growing water demand, and then the land degradation issues, of course, and all the global elements we'll need to look at more carefully, which is how to deal with it, considering the climate, and then to address the capacity building. The first challenge, which is the safe drinking water. We have discussed it and presented with different presentation. We know that very few countries are going to meet it. Actually, we are from 54. We have only 26 countries who are going to meet this challenge. But there are other opportunities to further develop it. We will not have opportunity to discuss it here. But for some who are interested, we can give them the elements of further discussion on these matters. The same for the access to sanitation, particularly with regard to exploiting peri-urban and slum areas, where definitely we're not going to meet this challenge. But if you take the area of the cooperation, particularly considering the transboundary water basins, that's where Africa should, more recognize and build on water, certainly an area for cooperation, and increasing the agreements and discussing with the African riparian countries to manage, the resources as a whole, in general. And this is done, for example, we have gone through from 20 basins, treaties up to, in terms of international, up to 60 treaties, international treaties within this continent, within a few years, and we need to increase these possibilities. Regarding the fourth challenge, providing water for food security, again, of course, this is one of the greatest stake. How to make sure that African continent will use adequately this water resource to sustain its agriculture, and particularly if we consider that the food insecurity is going to be increased in the coming years or in the coming decades, considering the population growth. And we have to consider the irrigated areas, which again is not high, and then link the water resources we have to develop hydropower in particular. If we consider that the capacities to generate hydropower today is low, considering the hydro dams and other which has been constructed so far. Of course, you have to take into consideration the impact, the various impact which has been developed, particularly within the World Commission of Dam, for example. But some figures. Many African nations today have less capita electricity consumption, less than 80 kilowatt per hour. And if we can compare these very low figures to what people have in other countries, particularly in Norway or in Canada or in the United States, but then if you take into consideration what we have in one of the basins in Congo, the Grand Inga, for example, which have a potential of developing more than 40,000 megawatts of electricity, it shows again that there are opportunities in one way or another to improve those possibilities and then to distribute this energy all around this continent. And we have the meeting growing demand, which is also one other challenge we'll need to consider. And the same for the water pollution, particularly with regard to the value of ecosystems we have to consider, and then, particularly the water poor, and then consider the issue of global climate change. We'll need also to tackle in one way or another how within this challenge, which is the big challenge of global climate change, will tackle the issue of water. One summary with regard to the different potential impact if we map the different part of Africa into the northern part where we have the water stress, which will be worsen in the North Africa, and then the Western African part where you will have drought and the climate shift, the Eastern African part where you have the rainfall, which is going to be increased, and then in the southern part where the water stress is certainly going also to be increased and form into the drought, and those are some of the elements which we should consider, particularly within these different challenges. And how to meet all those challenges, part of the solution would be to enhance certainly the capacity of the people, again, considering these big challenges, the knowledge which will be needed, the technology which will be needed, how to tackle those water challenges, considering the capacity is one of certainly the main discussions we're going to have within particularly our different institutions and within our different universities and others. Let's just to summarize very quickly, in terms of potential solutions, how do we see governments performing and enhancing the capacity to address the water challenges? We think that the investment in terms of improving the knowledge through human capacity development is one of the important factors. And identifying opportunities for training, but at the same time looking at the water professionals and improving the level of information about Africa water resources will be also one of the other elements we'll need to look at more carefully in the future. We can conclude that, and that's what one of the lessons learned we should take. These past 20 years, the world has been significantly recognizing a big economic growth, significant progress. And we have tremendous trends, but at the same time, huge deterioration in terms of environment and energy and food crisis, which again, we're having at the same time a big economic growth, certain advancement in some areas, but at the same time we have huge deterioration. What should be certainly done in the future would be to look at some areas where big progress has been made, in particular with regard to renewable energy. We have talked about that, the energy efficiency, the innovation in terms of climate change, etc. And then, but we at the same time try to see how to provide opportunities, particularly for the new young researchers for the future, which means we need to increase our efforts in terms of equity. How to make sure that we will revitalize the globe, and protect our planet, our ecosystems, and at the same time considering what the trends of the global economy is. It means to sustain 5 minutes, to sustain our efforts in terms of increasing the economy and revitalizing the global economy. Again, future solutions should be passing through those elements. Innovation, improving the economy, the energy and natural resource efficiency, better fiscal policies, address the inclusiveness of the policy processes, the capacity to create a decent job. I think these are some of the elements we have to consider, and particularly with regard to the economic growth, how to make sure that we'll accelerate progress in the area of global health and the area of gender equity, and then reduce the impact on the poor and the vulnerable groups, particularly with regard to some of the refugees. The elements which we should today insist in general should be not only on water as a whole, but also in terms of energy, ocean, in terms of sustainable cities, in terms of sustainable agriculture, food agriculture, everywhere where water is having in one way or another an impact or an intervention. Those are some of the elements we want to just propose and include in this type of future for sustainability, including, of course, private sector's intervention and intervention, and particularly what type of global action in terms of sustainability of the economy we should think all of us for the future. That's some elements I wanted to present very quickly to give you some future path for thinking. Thank you very much.